All right, let's bring in Pete Hegseth, Fox Feds Weekend co-host, served in Afghanistan. Pete, we knew this was going to happen, but I just love the way General McKenzie said, yeah, we had seats open on the plane, but no one came. Maybe because the gates were locked, people tried to get through. No wonder the seats were empty. I even doubt the total number of evacuees. They might have the seats, but a lot of these planes left half full.
Yeah, they did. But and that last photo, which is a powerful image, Major General Christopher Donahue, he was the commander of the 82nd Airborne, the last one to get on that aircraft. I don't blame him for that.
No.
If I'm him, I'm getting every single one of my men and women on that aircraft as quickly as possible ahead of the deadline because of the threat assessment, because of the ineptitude of higher brass and the White House. If I'm him, I'm getting out. Ultimately, the process was haphazard over the last 2 weeks. His soldiers, those Marines who we lost, did what they could to grab Afghans through gates that were open in a haphazard manner at certain times based on conflicting guidance from the State Department. And as a result of the failure of leadership at the top, not of him, at the top, we have hundreds of American citizens left behind. And I sit here, you know, you sleep on it and you text with a lot of Afghan vets, and I wish they could speak right now. And so I try hard to channel on behalf of them. And the overarching feeling that I get time and time again is a feeling of betrayal, a feeling of failure, a feeling of weakness, a feeling of dishonor, and ultimately a feeling that there needs to be accountability somewhere, anywhere. And that picture of General Donahue, from all I've heard, he's a great soldier. But if you look at the information, there's been hundreds of generals in the field over the last 20 years. In these conflicts, and not one has ever been relieved by military brass for combat ineffectiveness. These are wars that were lost not by the troops on the ground, but by political leaders and generals who didn't advance the right strategy. And as a result, as you said, we've left troops, we've left American citizens and allies on the ground, and we've left the most legitimized, the most robust, the most radical and dangerous terror army the world has ever seen behind us 20 years after 9/11. The group that we fought is back, armed with the Haqqani network and al-Qaeda, and Brian, as you did in that last segment, our Black Hawks and our weapons. That's what's as demoralizing as anything else. It's not clear when we get to this 20th anniversary. What is clear is that we're less safe, unfortunately. Yeah. Maybe we understand the threat just a little bit better, Islamism, maybe just a little bit, but ultimately the realities on the ground show that we didn't, if you're going to weigh the wins and losses, we didn't get much out of that effort despite the sheer valor of so many of two decades.
Well, Pete, now there are calls for, some are saying they want President Biden to resign. There are now 90 retired generals and admirals that are calling for Austin and Milley to resign. Where do you stand?
I think Austin and Milley should resign. The idea that a debacle of this size and scope can go without accountability is what boggles the minds of guys that have carried rifles. I've tethered my rifle to my body. My unit in Iraq raided an entire town for days because we lost a 240 Bravo mounted machine gun in an ambush against our scout platoon. We went house to house, day after day to find a rifle. We ended up not finding it. When you think of that vis-a-vis the decisions that were made on Bagram, the decisions that were made to allow them to release prisoners, the decisions that were made to not accept, we were accepting every other deal of the Taliban. We didn't accept their deal to stay out of Kabul. We didn't pay the attention we should to the threat assessment while Marines were vulnerable. All the different things that were there, and no accountability at all. Jake Sullivan, Anthony Blinken says that the Taliban might earn legitimacy. This is, and it does, the buck does stop with Joe Biden, although it's not clear that he understands the depth of the decisions he's made. And what we get instead, and what's so maddening and frustrating, is we get the spin from the podium like we got yesterday. Look at the numbers. Look at the historic airlift. That's like the captain of a cruise ship that's going down and has been going down for many years, making a fatal decision of when to evacuate at the wrong time, and then yelling about how proud he is of the amount of people that were evacuated while hundreds of people drown in the ocean, as if that's something to be proud of. They're going to spin it because it's no longer in the DNA, guys, of leadership politically or the scary part in the military to take accountability for clear failures. And Joe Biden is someone who's never shown an ability to fire people who are incompetent because he's incompetent himself.
Sure. Well, you know, Pete, they've got to spin it because when you look at the whole story, ultimately, right now, the big story is we retreated and ultimately we left Americans behind. And that is a terrible legacy for an American president. You were talking about accountability. We were speaking to your fellow Afghan vet, Brian Mast, who's a congressman from the great state of Florida. And he was talking about how we get accountability going forward. But he was also quite struck at the dignified transfer on Sunday of the number of times Joe Biden looked at his watch. Watch this.
The most important thing that you bring into battle is the reason why. Why are you doing that? What are you fighting for? And the why for President Biden in every single action here is totally unacceptable. And that's what has to be held to account for everybody that's been a part of this process. Why did you let yourself become intimidated? Why did you pick an optical date just so you could have a photo op? Why did you give up the high ground? Why didn't you listen to those that warned you otherwise? President Biden is the one that deserves the shame. He's more concerned about his watch than about giving those families every single minute to talk about how they feel and the stories that they could tell about their sons and daughters.
And Pete, as Peter Doocy said earlier, you know, we've known for a while what the date was because the date certain was what Joe Biden said, even though he said circumstances could change. He was going to pull out regardless of what happened.
The Taliban saying is the Americans have the watches, but we have the time. And what a sad piece of evidence that is more true than ever before. I listened to a couple of those families on Sean Hannity's program last night. Many of them said he didn't just do it once. He did it with almost every single family, if not every single family. As if, come on, folks, is this over yet? And I bet a lot of those families are conservatives or inclined to be Republicans. But I guarantee you, if this had been handled in a way that wasn't preventable, that wasn't sheer weakness, that wasn't based on incompetence, that wasn't based on fake deadlines, that wasn't based on poor military decision-making and digging his heels in, even if they didn't like Joe Biden, they would have stood there and wanted to listen to the condolences of a commander-in-chief. That is a tradition, something that no family ever wants, but they will stand and receive because it is the full weight of the love that a nation has for those who give everything. And for families to decide they don't even want to take part in it, that shows you the level of betrayal from this White House to their mission. It was never about whether we should get out. It was all about how we do. And when your boys are made vulnerable, boys and women are made vulnerable, ultimately at the behest of the Taliban, our enemy who you've now funded and given biometric data to, and then you retreat, I wouldn't want that meeting either. And you know, it was over a little bit sooner for Joe Biden because of those meetings didn't happen, and looks like he was fine with that.
Yeah, the other thing is, Pete, you guys didn't lose a battle. I mean, how many times you crushed, how many terrorists have been killed, how many Taliban have been forced out of the country. We chose to give this country back to them. Could have held it forever if we chose, and we could have used it as an outpost to fight the war on terror, which we're in the middle of. But you brought up this interesting, that you talk about people being accountable. As we went over yesterday with the Washington Post story, not denied, that General McKenzie got a call from Borodor, and he said, listen, I don't want to take Kabul today. We're not prepared to take it, but the ministries are abandoned. What do you want to do? Should we secure it, or should you secure it? And McKenzie, knowing the president's goal to get out, said, you secure it, we only need the airport. Setting up that small perimeter, setting up the bombing that killed 170 Afghans, maybe more, 13 Americans, and sending 18 to the hospital who are, by all reports, are struggling for their lives at Ramstein Air Base. So if you're one of those families, you're wondering, I could tell you in real time the decision that killed my son or daughter. And on top of that, he keeps going into his personal story, which is tragic, but it's well chronicled, and it's not about you. As if John McCain brought up every time there was a rough situation, well, I was a prisoner of war. He would never talk about it. He said, it's not about me. That's Vietnam. That's then. This is now. And that's what made it so miserable. No one knows how to deal with a grieving person. There's no handbook for it. But talking about yourself, really not a good move.
Talking about yourself and talking about your son who died tragically, but not in combat, is not the way to talk about it. And again, the sad part of it is he's not a real commander-in-chief because he's not all there on making these decisions. But if I'm a general and I'm given that option, I say stay out of Kabul over our dead body. And here's what I know. I've been talking to vets all over the place who've been involved in trying to get Afghan special operators out of Afghanistan who fought valiantly to the very, very end, all the way to the Kabul airport. There were hundreds and thousands of them. Consolidate the Afghan special forces into the capital. Allow them to control the streets. Keep the Taliban out. And while they're controlling the streets, or at least a far wider perimeter than 10 feet, you're allowed to evacuate Americans because the writing is on the wall of what's happening. The amount of bad decisions are staggering.
Pete, the immediate concern, obviously, for the Americans that are left behind, for our allies that have been left behind, what the Taliban will do to them. But long term, as we're coming up to the 20th anniversary of 9/11, they have, you mentioned our data, they have our weapons. You saw Brian's report in the last block. They have so many of our weapons, our Black Hawk helicopters, and they have Afghanistan now. What is the threat going forward for America?
The threat's worse. I don't know what their calculation is as far as their desire to strike us here or strike in Europe. If it doesn't exist now, it will. You can't be in bed with Haqqani and Al-Qaeda and ISIS-K to some level and not have a desire for a spectacular mass casualty event. But what I think you're going to see over the next days and weeks, and we've already seen some reporting out of it already, it's already happening right now. It's bloodletting. Blood is running in the streets of Kabul. They are going door to door, finding anyone who couldn't get out, anyone who worked with us, anyone who's not willing to bow to the Taliban. And I think what tragically could become a part of our lives, and I hope it doesn't, are the types of videos that we saw splashing across our screen when ISIS took over Iraq. Executions, public executions, retribution, killings door to door, videos that barely make their way out, or others that are celebrated by the Taliban. That's going to be the long tail of this disaster. In an optics sense, is them dancing on our grave and executing our allies. They will. This is no Taliban 2.0.
And remember,
they will
we
say
went
what
back.
they need to say. They don't care what the international world's recognition says.
And Pete, remember, we had to go back to Iraq. Remember? Because Joe Biden thought it was a great idea to pull out. And you might say Joe Biden's gotten old and lost his fastball. That might be true. But it's exactly what he thought in 2005, exactly what he thought in 2009, exactly what he thought in 2011. This is him. And this is why no one listened to him. Right? McChrystal got fired in that Rolling Stone story because they were mocking Joe Biden's idiotic decisions, and now we're stuck with these idiotic decisions. And he says the Joint Chiefs
go back.
Yeah, he says the Joint Chiefs of Staff are in support of this. Number one, and now the Pentagon's blaming the British, saying, well, they made us keep that gate open longer to get more evacuees out. That's nice. Blame the British.
Hey, Pete, thank you very much. A few commentators have got the experience you do. You served there. We appreciate your service, and thanks for weighing in on what's going on.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Pete.
You bet. All right.
Appreciate it. God bless everyone that served there.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, indeed.